was starving, so I like polished mine off. Yeah.
Nice.
I would go again.
Yeah. I find I like beef in a salad when you like grate it.
Yeah.
Beef salad.
Yes, please, my love.
Ready to go.
I'm the timekeeper.
Okay.
So after 2 minutes, I will give you a wave with my phone, and you'll have 2.5 minutes is what Sophie said for each speaker.
Well, that takes the pressure off. I wish I had known that. That's great. I'll look at you.
Yes.
Okay.
Go, Jess.
We're so professed with our timekeeper, like a real and our live stream. Set us live. You can hear me.
Should I keep it unlimited or save it, or we can keep it?
I guess we'll probably be fine for this. Yeah, what are you planning to do post-graduation?
I want to stay here. Yeah. It's a nice place.
Yeah. I know. The street fries are a bit better.
This wine is excellent.
Oh yeah?
That is really good.
I'm enjoying my water. It's pretty clear.
It's clear water.
Hello again. We're back. Everyone's enjoying their meal and their drinks. Okay. So, I want to acknowledge that we gather on the unceded ancestral lands of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq of Newfoundland and Labrador, and that our government continues to lay claim to those lands of the Innu and Inuit of Labrador as well. Colonialism continues to be a tool in the destruction of our environment and the genocide of Indigenous peoples, as evidenced in the poisoning of the Churchill River as a renewable energy project, and the violence enacted towards Indigenous families through the residential school and foster care systems, as well as the thousands of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people across this country. Our fight to stop climate change must include stopping this violence and recognizing the self-determination of Indigenous nations.
Woo!
Last month, the Labrador Land Protectors were given suspended sentences of 2 years for resisting the destruction of their own lands, waters, and way of life. Shame. Our legal system is a part of our colonial problem and is being used as a tool to silence and suppress them. We encourage everyone to donate to their legal fee funds as they must retain their lawyer and can be jailed immediately if found on the Muskrat Falls site. You can find the link to the fundraiser on the Social Justice Co-op Facebook page and Twitter. Please go do that. So we're about to start our panel now. For the first 30 minutes, we're going to have the panelists answer some prepared questions. And for the last 30 minutes, we encourage you all to share your perspectives too, whether you have a question or a comment or topic you'd really like to discuss with the panel. We all have valuable insights to share, so we really encourage folks to get involved in this chat. So just raise your hand if you'd like to share something, or you can also text questions or comments to 905-464-0130, and if you can't remember that, I'll tell you again. So I'd love to introduce to you our moderator for this evening, Viviana, right here. Woo! And to get things going and introduce our panel. Thank you so much.
Woo! Yes.
Hello everyone. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you everyone for being here. My name is Viviana. I'm from Colombia. I've been in St. John's for 11 years. I'm a member of the Zero Waste Action Group. I'm a zero waste consultant for businesses and organizations. And I'm very excited to be here with these great human beings. I've had the pleasure to work with in different ways, different moments during my zero waste journey, which started in 2017. Now, it's not like you're gonna go to my place and see no waste. You will. But I'll give you a tour and tell you the story how my family of 3 humans and 2 cats went from one garbage bag bi-weekly to the same bag, but monthly or a little bit more than that. This is still a lot compared to those little jars that you can see on social media with the garbage, the year-water garbage from the whole family. But it's much less compared to what we used to produce before. I will also give you examples of things that we decided not to do because of family or personal preferences, or because we don't have the resources, time, money, energy, skills to replace everything that will come to our house and turn into waste. And that's the thing. Going zero waste and low waste requires a lot of energy, planning, decision making, budgeting, a lot of stuff. And a lot of times we end up like feeling guilty or feeling that it's not enough. But there's a lot of things out there, out of our control, that prevent us from really achieving low waste. And that's what we are going to discuss tonight. What are those barriers that we as individuals or small businesses face, and what needs to be changed. So we have a great panel, and we also recognize that not all the voices that we would like to be here are here. We're missing people, missing representing the population like rural Newfoundland and Labrador, indigenous people, single parents, people with disabilities. So anyone here or through Facebook who's watching us and want to make that voice heard, please share it with us. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists. So Debbie Wisemam. Debbie is an activist, web developer. She's a member of the St. John's Food Policy Council and Food and Mayor with Food First NL, and serves on the board of the Social Justice Co-op and Happy City St. John's. In 2020, she co-founded the non-for-profit Share the Harvest NL. Successfully lobbied the provincial government to change legislation to allow hunters to donate moose and caribou meat to food banks. She's an advocate for poverty reduction She serves on several boards and committees for community organizations and is an engaged advocate for sustainable development in urban design. She covers municipal politics for the Independent. Really? Oh. And endeavored to set up a tiny home with her partner in Puch Cove, but regulatory obstacles preventing them from realizing these goals. Rob Salsman. Rob is the owner of the Battery Cafe, where he collaborates with me and Sauve as consultants and his staff to reduce waste through measures like selling reusable drink containers and offering discounts to customers who use reusable containers, providing used coffee grounds for free for the community, providing compostable takeaway coffee cups and lids, switching from plastic to wooden takeaway cutlery, and consolidating garbage and recycling daily to minimize the use of bags. And Sarah Sauve, she's a music scientist currently working as a postdoctoral fellow in cognitive aging and auditory neuroscience lab at MAN. She's been involved with the Zero Waste Action Team, using her research and data visualization skills for the cause. She recently built an app that represents data collected through the Zero Waste Action Team's brand audit as part of the Global Brand Audit 2020. So, thank you all of you for being here. And let's get started with the first question. How did we get so wasteful?
So how do we get so wasteful? Capitalism. Capitalism told us that we need more things, right? And if you buy all these things, you're going to be happy. So you keep buying these things, you surround yourself with stuff. You're not happy, so you buy more stuff. You're still not happy, because what makes you happy is actually experiences and time with people.
You're here.
Yeah. That's where true happiness comes from. And, when the pandemic started, it seemed like things were going to change, but it's been since the 50s that this stuff has been going on, and it's going to take more than I think a year to change our mindsets. And you only have to look at I thought it was improving a bit, but then around Christmas time, I look on Facebook and I see people with their kids at Christmas, and the house is full, the whole room is full of toys, and it's like, they don't need all those toys. They really don't. They don't need that. They need a couple of toys to be happy. And so that's just the lie capitalism has told us.
So, yeah, I completely agree. I think going on our tiny house journey really helped us stop and realize the truth of that. And, through the process of trying to figure out how to live in a tiny house, we really took a lot of steps backward in what our assumptions were about how we were supposed to live our lives and what we needed. Because I think a lot of what we think we need aren't necessarily needs. But I think at the root of how do we get so wasteful, it's really a detachment from meeting our needs at the community level. And so many of the systems that serve our needs have become centralized for efficiency. Yes. So if you look at our food system, our building construction, energy production, because waste is not just stuff you can hold like garbage, it's anything that exits the cycle of consumption and waste. And our transportation, production of materials and goods, all of those things have become centralized. And not that long ago, we were meeting a lot of those needs at the community level. So I think as we shifted to a global economy and become further and further entrenched in capitalism, we as a society have become a lot more selfish because we're more isolated. And when we become more selfish, we become sadder. And to try and fill that gap, to try and fix those feelings, we consume more unnecessarily. And a lot of the time we're not even cognizant of it. And I definitely was victim of that trap prior to when we went to the tiny house journey. And I really had to come to a reckoning with myself about how much space do I actually need, and why do I think I need this much space? Is it because I actually need it, or because some other person told me that to be a successful person, this is what I should have? So I think, yeah, you need to look inward and really question yourself on what you need.
Okay, thank you, Viviana, and the organizers. Pleasure to be here. I'm of an age where I can remember when we weren't always so wasteful. And I was born in 1961, and I will remember growing up and using old pots and pans and broken dishes and that kind of thing. I mean, it was very common. That was a leftover from decades before the Great Depression, when reducing and reusing was an economic necessity, and then World War II, when reducing, reusing, and recycling was a national mandate. I mean, the population learned, and that persisted and carried on for another decade or 15 years or so, until the generation that had grown up afterwards, without that hardship, aka the boomers, began to develop the new technologies, the new way of living, and forget the need to reduce or reuse. So things kind of got a little bit out of control from that. Good example would be, I can remember well when disposable diapers first came out. And I can remember, my mother, who was a bit of my inspiration for this way of thinking, hanging out the old cloth diapers well after disposable ones were available, because she insisted that she wanted to kind of save the planet even then. But she was pretty much alone, and I'm sure, especially here in Newfoundland, where you had families with 4 or 5 kids running around with diapers, disposable diapers would have been a huge relief for a lot of families. And it was very convenient, and it improved their way of life, but it left behind a mountain of toxic waste. And there was no real accounting or thought for how to deal with that, and there really still hasn't been. The connection between the production of consumer goods that we use and the way that they get left behind has never really been established. And so we are where we are.
Woo.
Good evening, everyone. The first thing I wrote down as question was also capitalism. And single word in a nutshell what the problem is. But more specifically, I came across a quote recently, and I could not find it again today, from a CEO sometime in the 50s, where he asked his audience, why would we only sell 1 bottle when we could sell 12? And so it was the beginning of the shift from moving products into the households to moving products through households. And that dramatically has increased the amount of waste that we produce, of course. And with that came all of the marketing and all the brainwashing behind why we need all this stuff to be happy, just so that we can produce more, so we have more profit. So I think that's one of the big sources of the root of our waste. The other one I was thinking about is curbside pickup. Now, I don't think we should get rid of it, but I think it did a lot for this idea that waste goes away. Right? When you put something in the garbage, someone picks it up and it just magically disappears, and we don't have to think about what happens to it. I thought about this actually recently, and it was obvious to me in a lot of cop shows where people throw out evidence, but it gets found. So it's a really obvious idea that no, when you throw something away, it doesn't just disappear. It goes somewhere, but that has been erased from a consciousness. And we think of garbage as going away, when in fact there is no such thing as away.
Woo!
Thank you. The second question is, how do we reduce waste under an economic system that encourages in profits from waste?
Thank you. I have less to say about this because I'm not an economist. But what I wrote down is essentially all I could think about was, we need a system that is not based on profit to start with. Woo! Yeah. That was the idea. But I think that's a long way away. So in the short term, I was thinking about something called the deposit return system that is really highly promoted by a group called Break Free from Plastic, which is what we did our brand audit with. And in their report called Talking Trash, they really, really played up deposit return system, DRS, as the system to deal with waste. The idea is that whenever you buy something, you pay a deposit, and when you return it, you get that money back. That exists to a certain extent in a lot of places. We have it here. The idea is to scale it up much, much bigger, because it's the only apparently proven system that will produce above 90% rates of return. So there, I guess, needs to be some sort of money incentive for people to return things. And the other thing, I guess, is to shift value from waste to used materials. Now, I don't know how to do that, but I feel like that would be part of the answer. And that DRS sort of does that, right? It puts value on something that is used. It puts a monetary value on it, and it devalues raw materials. So yeah, that's my answer.
Okay, so this question, I think this question takes a kind of a one-sided view of that situation. And in fact, I don't think that business is set out to encourage or profit from waste. I think the issue is, in fact, that they do not profit from waste. So picture this. You've got a small manufacturer here in Newfoundland somewhere, there are lots of them, and they're making products for sale, and provide people jobs and so on, and they generate in their process some waste plastic, waste metal, and and some waste paper and waste toner cartridges and all those other little things in the business that get left behind. And then they ship it to their customers via FedEx, which puts a little pollution in the air and some packaging and so on, and all that stuff is wasted. And that is a cost. And believe me, businesses do not want cost. If they could profit from that waste somehow, they absolutely would. So the trouble is, the waste has no value, right? No one wants it. There are some exceptions. Compost has value. I'm sure there's some composters here, right? Compost has got value. And there are some metal and some paper and some plastic recyclers in town around the world who can make, who have figured out how to make a living by taking that stuff out of the waste stream and putting it back in and actually turning a little bit of profit from it. There are also energy producers who are using waste as a way to make energy, relatively clean way. So, so as I say, there's a way to do it. Anyway, these things are good, but it's still not enough. Right? It's not enough. The technology and current free market economy works too fast for people to compost and recycle their way out of the waste issue that we've got.
Yeah.
So the producers have to take some responsibility for sure. And so I would suggest three things, as a way to try to change that paradigm. One would be crisis creation. We all know there's a looming waste crisis, right? It's not just air pollution. I mean, that's just the thing that affects us most of the time. But crisis creation is essentially, the imagery, the messages, and so on that's broadcasted through media to accentuate, elevate the crisis. Next thing would be then the activism, on the part of people to put pressure on politicians and businesses to be accountable and to make change in the way that they do things, and reward or punish them. You reward politicians by electing them, and you reward businesses by buying their products, and you punish them by doing the opposite. And finally, we would need, intelligent government regulations to help the process. I'm thinking things like labeling. You know, we're recycling labeling now. It may be clear to some of you, but it's unintelligible to most. It's not helpful. You know, so something that is useful for people that they know how to recycle product, they know the products are reusable or being used, would be very helpful. Tax incentives, that type of thing. So that's what I think, and see how easy that is.
Okay, so not being a business owner, I interpreted the question a little differently, I guess. Planned obsolescence is a super real thing. Manufacturers intentionally build things so they will break and you will have to replace them. And this is like a cornerstone of capitalism. So we really need to embrace repair culture. We need to help each other mend things, support local skilled tradespeople who can make replacement parts or triage damage, like finish carpenters, welders, machinists, sewers and tailors, and the tinkerers among us.
Yeah.
Stop buying things that are unnecessarily complex and made from plastic. You don't actually need a microwave. You don't, like, I mean, I have one. Like, we reheat things with like a pot of boiling water on the stove with steam, or just like in the oven on lowest temperature. Like, it takes a little bit of extra time to go do something else you have to do while you're waiting. Stop buying things that are, unnecessarily complex. So you also don't need like fancy exercise machines or cappuccino machines in your house. Like, come somewhere like this and enjoy community. Shift your perspective on standard of living so that you prioritize reliability, function, and community. You'll start to realize that you don't need half the stuff that you thought you did, and you'll enjoy using quality, durable tools, and you'll feel less isolated. We didn't have a can opener for some reason, and we're trying to figure out what we're going to do about that, because we try to be really intentional in every purchase we make. So we bought one that's like super old school, that doesn't have a twisty thing that can eventually break, and it's just a blade that you push into the thing and has a lip that you can use on the edge. It's never going to break, like ever. Like, probably my children will use it, hopefully, if they get the same balance I do, hopefully. Like, we need to intentionally rebel against consumption and internalize your self-worth. Stop looking to purchasing to define your value. Like, that's not how to do it. Like, we need to make shifts in local practices and laws as well, so that waste minimization is incentivized. Cultural shifts don't just happen spontaneously, and most people intrinsically resist change. So we have to organize to boycott high packaging products so that it becomes unprofitable for stores to market things in this way. We have to charge people money at the dump for garbage disposal. Like, right now, you can drive to Robin Hood Bay and dump as much as you want, and there's no cost for that. That's a big problem. And instead of subsidizing massive wasteful industries, direct subsidies to farmers and repair workers. So that we can decentralize.
Related to what Sarah said, I thought she was actually going to use the same quote that I saw today. I saw a quote from a CEO in the 50s who said, your profits, if you want to fund your profits, so they're in the dumpster. Meaning that your products have to be disposable and breakable. You don't want somebody buying something that's going to last 50 years anymore. So, I thought that's what you were going to say. But, my answer's a little bit shorter. Just dismantle capitalism. It's something that wasn't built to benefit us. It was built to benefit the ultra rich, and it's not working for us because it wasn't built for us.
And the third and last question, in your experience, what stands out as a barrier to reducing waste that you couldn't solve as an individual, and how might we address this barrier structurally?
So I'm going to read from this because I'm a little bit nervous to say this part. I'm going to speak as a person living with a lower income. Many of the things that we can do to reduce waste so things like menstrual cups.
Yeah.
And nobody get uncomfortable. Okay? A good cup costs about $40 up front, and it saves a fortune over its lifetime because they can last up to 10 years. And that's so much money saved and so much waste kept out of the landfill. But if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you probably don't have that $40 up front, right? You can spend $40 on that, or you can spend $10 on tampons, and you can have $30 left over to pay bills and buy food and stuff like that. And yeah, so you're going to choose the tampons and the bills, right?
Yeah.
There's also things like clothing. If you can afford it, you can buy better quality clothing that are going to last longer. I try my best to buy secondhand as much as I can. But the selection's not always there. If anyone goes thrift shopping, they know that. Yeah, so I end up buying things in stores that are cheaper and like cheaply made and don't last as long. I'd love to be able to go to Lululemon and buy some leggings, but I can go to Walmart and get like 5 pairs of leggings for the same price. And so I go to Walmart and buy 1 pair. Yeah, and then I feel guilty because I'm buying these clothes that contribute to climate change and contribute to the problem. So it's like, you know, it's a pretty bad cycle to be in. And if you can't afford to make those investments, you're probably working more than one job, and you only have so much energy. So when it comes to things like recycling, composting, and researching your purchases to make sure that they are ethical, some people just don't have the energy or time to do that. And so how do we solve that? We lift people out of poverty. We install basic income and make sure that nobody in this country is living in poverty.
Here we go.
So I'm going to take a little bit of a municipal slant to this question because I work professionally in that area. So one of the things that I thought about with respect to barriers that an individual could not kind of surpass by themselves is municipal zoning and development regulations. So I face this one personally, and it's, you know, if you try to do things differently, you can be charged or jailed. Like, it's simply put. So, and that's for really basic things. So like most municipalities, you need a permit to have a cold frame to grow vegetables. And a lot of the time that's discretionary use. So that means it's up to the council's discretion to give you that permit. So they can decide based on their own opinion or the opinion of their electors that they don't want to grant that permit for whatever reason. So, you know, weaponizing discretionary use is a really big barrier to living sustainably. The same can be said for keeping backyard hens, which we've all seen probably in the news over the last couple of years. So that's a big problem. Also, we don't have enough mixed-use neighborhoods. So the way that our communities are organized right now, commercial, industrial, and residential zones are all separated. And this is actually a really big problem. And it decentivizes us from becoming reacquainted with the labor it takes to produce goods, our consumption habits, and what happens to waste, because it's out of sight, out of mind. When we have mixed-use neighborhoods where all of these activities are taking place in the same area, you really get a better perspective of the full cycle of all of those things, and you're more in touch. Additionally, on that side of things, like right now in St. John's and in most municipalities, I would say in North America, we have legislated residential density restrictions. So there are places in St. John's which we zoned R1, which is residential low density, and that means you are not allowed to have greater residential density than the typical single-family detached dwelling. So places like Southlands and like modern subdivisions that are food deserts and are like require you to have individual vehicles. This model of development it reaffirms the capitalist cycle, and it perpetuates thinking that I need to buy a ton of stuff to build this huge house so I can feel good about myself. And that's just not, it's not helpful. And it strengthens class divides as well. So that's one big thing. And I'm out of
Okay, yes, it's a big problem. It's a big problem. I was just talking with Viviana. It was a great pleasure to work with Viviana last year and earlier this year. She company did a trash audit in our place. And we learned a lot and implemented a few changes to the way we did business to try to be a little more sustainable. But it's a challenge. And again, the biggest challenge is the disconnect between the producers and, where does the waste go? Producers have no accountability, minimal, and there was nothing on the far end aside from, say, municipalities where they can, or nature to look after what's left over. So that for me is the biggest barrier, and I don't think we're going to, we can be government, we can pressure our politicians to try to ensure that the producers think a little more long term, don't build in the planned obsolescence, are punished for it, when we do. But on the other hand, we need somewhere at the far end a more capable mechanism for receiving the waste. And I tell you what, if somebody was, again, I get back to this, but if somebody was to pay me for my waste, God, I would organize it, I'd sort it, I'd put it in my bag, I'd stack it up, I'd drive it to the place, if the company had a bit of discount. And think if I did, then we wouldn't need garbage trucks, right? We would use fewer garbage trucks, fewer receptacles, that kind of thing. So I'd really like to see the incentives and the innovation of the businesses to process the waste that's generated now, so that we can take more and more of it out of the stream that goes into the landfill.
Yeah.
Yes, as someone who comes from a place of more privilege, I have been able to put up those upfront costs. So I recognize that that is not for everybody. But I've been lucky to be able to do that, and there is more energy put in upfront, but I find that over time, it has saved me a lot of money and has saved me a lot of effort. Because things like bringing your own bags, things like buying in bulk just become habit. Asking yourself, do you really need something? It just becomes the way you do things. And so over time, it will become easier. What I wanted to talk about tonight was food waste. Because still, I've never achieved zero waste. But my biggest source of waste is still food packaging. And that was the case also for the brand audit that we did in October. I don't have the numbers, I've left my phone on the table. But the vast majority of the plastic waste that we picked up, this was 42 households over 2 weeks. We asked them to collect all of their plastic, recyclable, non-recyclable, wash as best as possible. And we spent 2 8-hour days sorting through all of it, looking at the brands, looking at the number, weighing it, and analyzing this. And overwhelmingly, food packaging is the biggest culprit. And I think the categories of food in that, dairy is one of the worst. Sophie's nodding. Yes,
So many
dairy.
reasons dairy is wasteful.
Yeah, packaged. So I guess to address that, moving to reusables with containers, that is, would be one way that we can reduce our food packaging. I know that causes some problems with reorganizing how shops work, how they're laid out, how food gets distributed. But that is, I think, a start, bringing our own containers, reusing them. Increase local shopping as well, right? Food deserts were mentioned. That increases packaging. Packaging is made so that food can be preserved over long distances of travel. But if we increase our local production of food and are more self-sufficient in terms of food production, then we probably need less food packaging. And the other thing that I came across only just last week is this storage technique of dehydration. This came from a friend who's working with some Indigenous people in Manitoba, and they're doing a series of talks and sharing their knowledge on food dehydration as a storage method, because it does not require the packaging that we use when we freeze things or fridge things. So that was pretty interesting. I don't know much about it, just found out, but I thought that was really relevant to this. And then just to quickly round back to the curbside pickup thing, I think it would be really interesting if the city maybe decided to do pickup once a month.
Yes.
For like a month. And so people will be faced with the garbage that they create to see what kind of a change that would make.
for our questions. Any question from the audience? Anything to share? Any comments? Facebook? Anything? Come on, first one. Really? Woo, we got one?
Yeah.
Woo. You wanna, or
Just yell.
maybe everyone here?
What kind of incentives would you like to see to utilize waste? Like would a tax break or some kind of like refundable or non-refundable tax credit for waste for businesses work? What kind of framework would you like to see that in?
Yeah, I think tax breaks or refunds if you put out less garbage. I know some people are like really upset with the city that the garbage limit is going down from 10 bags to 2 a week. Like, I put out 1 bag probably once a month, and it's like I don't understand all these how much garbage people make. But yeah, if there was like tax incentives to that, like the less garbage you have, you get a little bit of a tax break on your municipal taxes, or some kind of an incentive, that'd be great. And also if they picked up our composting and composted it and gave us some kind of tax break, that'd be great too. Yeah. The problem with composting right now is that it doesn't make money, and I don't think that should be a factor.
Yes.
Yeah, if you're here for legislative composting, absolutely. I think taxes are really important. So when we talk about lowering taxes, I'm not sure how I feel. I'm going to do more thinking about it. But I think one way of thinking about this, and maybe this is a little touchy, but I think the market needs to be a little less free.
Yes.
We shouldn't, eating fresh strawberries in winter shouldn't really be a thing. I think that choice is important and that kind of thing, but when I lived in Japan, people really ate with the seasons, and it wasn't like a niche thing. That was like at the food supply level, that was a thing. Like you go to the grocery store and you don't have the option of buying strawberries in the winter. And when the time came when strawberries were in season and they were beautiful and perfect and ripe, it was very exciting to eat strawberries, and it was a really joyful experience. So trying to just fill this need of having everything all the time available, which does require more packaging because it has to travel so far, it's kind of crappy quality anyway. So
Yeah.
why do we want that?
Yes.
So I think we need to make the market less free.
Woo!
That's interesting. So, we mentioned tax incentives. For me, tax incentives, again, to try to address and add more volume to the capability of handling the waste that is produced. We try to reduce it on the front end, but need a way to reduce it on the back end. And so the tax incentives, perhaps think tanks or government the programs for young entrepreneurs and that type of thing to help them get into some kind of a sustainable business would be good. Case in point, again with Vivian, I just mentioned earlier that one of the things we did at the Battery Cafe was we switched from our standard takeout coffee cups, which do not degrade, do not compost, to a compostable coffee cup. We did this back in the summer. It cost 60% more than the regular cups that we were using. Anyway, come to find, these things say they're compostable. They're not compostable either. Because St. John's does not have the high temperature composting facility that's required to compost these cups. So, what I'm saying is, wouldn't it be great to have a facility like that?
Yes.
And this is where tax incentive and some help for young entrepreneurs and that kind of thing can really help, because why do we set money? You know, some of us set something up like that, and that's where I kind of support the free market a little bit. As long as it's for good businesses.
The free local market's great.
Yay!
Yeah, greenwashing is such a thing. So bad.
What is that?
I guess I don't have that much to add. I think we have to be careful in what kind of incentives we use. Punitive incentives would be problematic just because companies, if they're forced to pay more, will pass on that cost to the consumer. That's how they phrase it. And so they're going to try to get around it because they're going to blame the consumers. They're going to say, well, you know, if you're going to charge us more, you're forcing consumers to pay more money. Like, well, no. Just if you just chose to cut your profit, then it'd be fine. But that's not the way that capitalism works. So, yeah. That's all I have to say.
I was just wondering if any of you have any examples of like really egregious greenwashing that you've seen in your day-to-day life, or just in trying to find ways around these barriers.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention like the fake greenwashing where they say something's, like you said, compostable, but there's like, it's not compostable everywhere. Or something's recyclable, it has the recycle symbol on it, but it doesn't get recycled everywhere, and that kind of thing. Think of like bamboo toothbrushes, and then the bristles are plastic, and so they're not really compostable, right? With plastic. You gotta cut the plastic bristles off your toothbrush, and then you compost it. So yeah, just stuff like that.
Yeah, I hate all the numbers. Oh god, I love recycling.
And
I think earlier when it was mentioned that the layout of the city is very compartmentalized, that commercial districts are off there in the hinterlands, right? And that there are a lot of blue deserts in the city. I'm a non-driver, and that is definitely an issue when it comes to how to dispose of waste in an appropriate way, and how to reduce waste, because as somebody else pointed out, if you don't drive, unless you're ride sharing or something like that, you're really, I shop like a European. I go to the supermarket, fill a knapsack, and take it home. The next day I go back. I don't shop in big quantities, but that does generate a lot more wrapping, you know, and packaging. Another thing I think that is definitely a greenwash is the impression that many people have that textile products, i.e. fast clothing, can just be sort of handed on to somebody else.
Yes.
But the reality is that even thrift shops and places like Value Village dispose of a heck of a lot of stuff. That is and that stuff often winds up on the shores of developing countries.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's highly problematic. And I thank God for this Philippines, because I think maybe last year or the year before, they sent several containers right back to us. Of like inappropriate clothing anyway, right, for the climate. It's just like, so yeah, I do think that the idea of passing on things to thrift shops is a good idea, but I think also we have to recognize that thrift shops cannot possibly absorb the enormous quantity. Like Rob, we're of a similar vintage, and I grew up in a home where like 8 kids who shared a closet, right? Nobody had 2 pairs of shoes and multiple outfits, yet today, the way that we've been conditioned, I bet you there's a whole lot of people living solo or in couples right here who are living in spaces that come with walk-in closets because that's how we live now, right? It's really, it's quite shocking when you really start to consider it. But for people who don't have access to cars in St. John's, that is a definite problem, for sure.
I just wanted to say I recently heard a podcast about the fashion industry and how evil it is. And they are the second largest contributor to climate change, only behind oil and gas.
Wow.
If you buy something online and you return it, it goes to a landfill, they don't restock it. All the synthetic fibers don't break down. And there's enough clothing right now in the world to last us for another 60 years if production just stopped. So, yay. The fashion industry is evil.
I'm wondering how much you guys think that, like individuals, how much of the responsibility lies on them to reduce, especially food packaging versus producers, especially considering, like a lot of people mentioned, the ability to not be able to go to bulk stores, especially down here. I know there's Ball sells like shampoo in bulk, but there's no bulk like stores, kind of like Bulk Barn. And so how much that resides with like consumers versus producers.
Your face said it all.
I personally think that the lion's share of the responsibility lies with government and industry. And I think that governments need to have the courage to stand up to the market and say, no, we're not doing it this way anymore. You really do have to have quite a lot of privilege to be able to participate in a low waste life. And I don't think any individual should feel shame around what they're restricted to do within this current system. And we need to demand better of our governments. I think one thing that kind of came to mind on this front is when I was thinking about my answers too, is kind of the way that governments are currently organized. So I think like we have like 276 municipalities in the province, and so each one of them individually has like no power. And I think we all know how little courage the provincial government has here. So I think that if we shifted our way of thinking about governance and government structure, if we had a regionalized system, that would wield a lot more power with respect to changing the way systems operate. Like if we had a regional government system for the Northeast Avalon, or even the Avalon as a whole, and we had representatives from all around that area teaming together to lobby the provincial government, that would hold a lot more power. And similarly, when we band together as a region in Canada, like if Atlantic Canada were to lobby Ottawa, and not just the 7 MPs here that carry no power, that would have a way bigger impact on the way that government interacts with industry. So I think we need to change how we think about governance.
Yeah, for me, I think it's so much actually rests in the hands of the individual, and it's individually what we do ourselves to reuse, reuse, recycle, and try to make the world a better place is excellent. We should keep doing it. But a far more useful thing is to persuade others and those around us, in our families, in our neighborhoods, to do the same thing. And then to lobby, as you say, Jess, to then get on to lobby politicians and vote them out or vote them in, depending on their views, so that governments will take some action. So, when you ask of the individuals, we should all continue definitely to do what we're doing to save the planet. But it's more important to keep organizing like this, inviting our members and open to sessions like this, letting them hear it, petition them. You know, let's get the images of the plastic bags hanging on the trees out on the East Coast Trail behind Robin Hood Bay. Let's get the fishing boat, the non fishing boats littered around the beaches. Those images have to be brute force and put out into the faces of those who can, really make a difference. So that's up to us as individuals.
Woo!
Yeah, I definitely think that individuals have a role to play, but I would agree with Jess that the lion's share goes with industry. And because it's just unfair that they're putting the blame on us, right? They're pushing all these products and then saying, but you're buying it, right? All these marketing campaigns are like millions of dollars in marketing to convince us to buy things. And then they try to shame us for buying those things, for making a decision. Like, it's ridiculous.
Here, here.
Anyways, one of the systems that I have heard of to help industry take responsibility is called extended producer responsibility.
Yes.
And that's a system, as far as I understand it, I don't know that much about it, that forces the producer to be responsible for the product at the end of its life. So the manufacturer is actually responsible for either disposing of or reusing or whatever the product ends up being in the end. When you're done with it, they have to take it back and deal with it. And so it's part of the idea of circularity in a circular economy where you close that loop. Right? The producer makes something, you buy it, and then it goes back to them and they have to deal with it. So that might also be one of the incentives to actually deal with waste and mitigate value.
I think they do it with like paint. It looks like it. They do? I think they do it with paint.
Paint, electronic,
I like that.
and tire.
Oh, okay. Battery? Yeah. Oh, battery.
They call EVs. Yeah.
Question, in 2 more minutes. Is this the last question, Leah? The last one?
Two more.
Okay.
Sure.
So, yeah, as much as definitely corporations and industry should take a lion's share of the responsibility for what they produce, how do you go about, like Debbie was mentioning, moving set from the limit of garbage bags going from 10 to how do you think is the best way or one of your ways that you have kind of helped influence social perceptions around low waste? Like we're all here, so we're not part of that group, but there's a really vast amount of humanity that just does not give a crap, really, and that's not on them at all. Like, they don't have time because their time is money, and we live in time. But how do you kind of deal with that?
Great question. It has been a challenge in my life. A lot of people who are resistant to this idea will come back with, well, I recycle. All right. I've been recycling since before you were born. All right. So there's these, I guess, outdated? Is that too harsh? I don't know, old ideas about how we deal with waste and what's efficient. And unfortunately, in my experience, a lot of people just kind of shut down because they feel attacked and they don't like being attacked. And I honestly just haven't yet perfected the art of like, how do you convince someone? I mean, the advice I have heard is find common ground with them. It's a good way to start. And what I've started doing, especially in conversations around like capitalism, I used to think it was the default. I'm like, of course we're capitalists, this is the way the world works. So I often start with saying, I used to think that too. I used to think that too. And this is how I changed my mind. And that's one way of maybe changing things. I mean, until last year, I didn't think of toilet paper as wasteful until my friend Lisa was here, pointed out, and she said, we chop down trees to wipe our butts and then throw it in the toilet and flush it away. Like, what is that? But in my zero waste journey, trying to remove things, it never occurred to me to get rid of toilet paper. But someone brought it up, and now I don't use toilet paper. That's maybe a little bit extreme for some people. But wash the cotton things, and it's fine. Yeah, bidet. That's considered, right, like underdeveloped and primitive, but wouldn't that be just fantastic? It's so much more efficient.
answer your question, is how to get people to care. You can either scare them or you can win their hearts. And I look at the example of, you remember the sea turtle with the plastic straw in his nose? Remember that? That single image caused a change around the world. Right? All of a sudden, everybody around the world got rid of plastic straws. That's where the power lies. That's why I say imagery, create the crisis. Get the images, get the messaging out there. Get it out there. And you will bring people around to the cause all at once, but that's, in my opinion, the way to make the change.
Yeah. Woo.
My answer's a bit less profound, but I think in general, people love to complain, and change is slow, and they will shift, because in a large portion of the city, we have automated pickup for garbage, and those bins can only accommodate 4 bags at a maximum, and there really hasn't been like an uprising from that portion of the city. Like, people got used to it. It's fine. So, like, the rest of the city who still is operating at a 10-bag limit, just give them time. Like, they'll catch up. They will. They have to. So I like Sarah's approach, and I'm probably going to start using that, other than what? The only thing that's ever worked for me is to make it a contest, because the person was really competitive, and so I would say, I only put out 1 bag of garbage like once a month, and then they like got into it and like trying to reduce their garbage to beat me. So that's the only way I've really been able to convert anybody.
One more. Our photographer.
Yay.
My question is maybe for Claire's reference here. If we think about waste management, we think about us and where we are right now. But what I'm hoping to communicate to everyone is, how do we create a system where people who want kids, I don't want them third, can build a education for our children to work off of a zero waste policy? Can we relearn this and teach it to our children? Great question.
So I think that's the way you convince kids of anything, right? You start early, start in school. That's actually a really good idea. I haven't thought of. Get schools to go zero waste, and then the kids are going to go home and go to their parents like, why are you making so much garbage? And convince their parents to change. That's a really good idea. I really like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was so mean to my mom about smoking cigarettes.
So I taught kindergarten in Japan for about a year. So I worked with 8 5-year-olds for a year. And the way the education system works in Japan is very different from how it works here. And it was communicated to me, like, on the first day at the school, was that it was just as much my responsibility to role model good, like, big picture behavior as it is to meet the curriculum outcomes. So like, I ate my lunch with the kids, and that was just as a focused period of time as math class was. And the kids had school lunch that was prepared in bulk and did not have any packaging. And it was brought to the school in large reusable containers, and then individually spooned out onto reusable plates with reusable cutlery. And the kids were used to that, like, from day 1. That was expected. And in Japan, they have, like, there's like 20 different streams of waste, and like different receptacles for each of those streams. And so sorting waste starts immediately in Japan, like, in life. So we had like 4 or 5 different bins in the classroom, and it was part of the daily exercise to practice together as a group, deciding which stream that piece of garbage should go in. And the level of recycling is beyond what we can ever imagine here. But that comes with enormous population density too. But I mean, that's like kind of a piece of hope, I guess, that can come from, you know, sometimes you think about super dense populations and enormous waste. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Only comment I have is just set an example for your kids. That's me.
Yeah, I guess all I have to add is, yes, I think that we can start with our children. It matters enormously if they model very quickly what us adults do, and it's also very, very important because do as I say, not as I do, just doesn't work. That's not fair. I mean, I have myself worked with 11-plus-year-old children for about 10 years. And it's amazing the insight that they have in the world. And it's also amazing the habits that they've picked up already at the age of 11. It starts very, very early, and it is very difficult right now to counter all the messaging that they get from a very early age. So it does take a conscious effort, but hopefully as things shift, as society shifts, as we shift our values, then that will become progressively easier. But yeah, I do think it's very important to include our children in this.
Can we just get another humongous round of applause for the panelists? Amazing discussion. So many thought-provoking statements made there. Thank you so much. And thank you to our moderator, Viv. Yay! And thank you to the staff here at Family Brewing, the volunteers from the Social Justice Co-op, and everyone for coming out tonight. Thank you so much. And we do this every month, but we are taking a break next month, but definitely tune in, follow us and everything to make sure you are aware of when we're going to have our next event. So thank you so much. If you do have any questions or ideas for our next topic or future topics, definitely reach out to us. We're really glad to hear from you. And so now we're going to take a little break now. You know, feel free if you have to head out, that's fine. But we're going to do a draw for the cake at 9, so stick around until then if you bought your tickets. And you can still buy some over there and head over to the merch table before you leave, okay? So thank you so much.